This is episode 337 of jumbleThink.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to jumbleThink, where we interview dreamers, makers, innovators, and influencers all about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality, too. Our guest on today's show is Rob Paulsen. More about Rob in a moment. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime fan, if you've never subscribed to jumbleThink, now's the time to do it. So head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts, search for jumbleThink, and click subscribe. To make it even easier, if you head on over to jumbleThink.com, you'll find links to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and more. So head on over, subscribe to jumbleThink, and never miss another episode of the show. Now let's join today's conversation with our guest, Rob Paulsen. Hey there, friends. Welcome to jumbleThink. My name's Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have a very special show, a really cool conversation lined up for you today. Our guest is Rob Paulsen. Now, you might not recognize that name, but I can almost guarantee that you will recognize his voice, or at least one of his voices. Rob is a voice actor, and he's voiced over 250 different animated characters, over 1,000 commercials. His most beloved characters are probably Yakko Warner from Animaniacs or Pinky from Pinky and the Brain. He's also voiced Raphael and Donatello from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Carl Wheezer from Jimmy Neutron, and a whole host of other characters. This was a really special conversation. I got to talk to Rob over 2 days. We dived deep in the world of animation, of creating voice, and into a lot of the things going on in culture and the world around us. Let's not waste any more time. Let's join our conversation with today's guest, Rob Paulsen. Well, Rob, thanks so much for taking time out and being on jumbleThink with us. What an honor to have a legacy in the world of voice acting on the show. So thank you so much for being on.
Not at all, Mike. Thanks for lowering your standards for an hour. It's my pleasure.
I've been fascinated around this world of creativity, especially in the world of, Hollywood to an extent, but in animation, there are so many different elements of creating. There's what you do, the voice acting, there's the animators, there's the story creators. There's just many, many pieces to this. And yet I feel like what you do in many ways brings the character to life in a way that simply animation can't. I mean, it's the same thing as silent movies. Without the voice, without the soundtrack, you can't have it. So what an honor to talk to you, who've voiced over 250 different characters. You've done thousands of commercials. You've done lots of stuff. Huge honor.
Well, thank you. Right back at you. Because as I said before we started recording, I'm well aware of your show and the service you provide to a ton of us. And it is a great pleasure and privilege to be here. You've already skirted the issue about the deep creativity and the number of people it takes to make this work right. I often, well, not often, always say in these circumstances, I don't draw them and I don't write them. I certainly accept your kind praise and appreciate in the spirit in which it's given. And sure, I'm an integral part. Jim Cummings is an integral part. Tress McNeil, Nancy Cartwright, Mark Hamill, the usual suspects who do this work a lot. But it is a deeply collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Man, I can't even draw stick figures.
You're doing better than me.
Thanks, man. Well, thank you. But when it works, man, I don't think it's hyperbole to suggest that it's magical. Yeah. It really is. Certainly timeless, and that's part of the magic. Not to sound too much like I work for Disney, although I do. But I'm a freelancer. But it is magical because of the timeless nature of it. My goodness, Bugs is what, 70 years old now, 75 years old, something like that. The actors who have performed Bugs Bunny, certainly Mel Blanc was the guy. Yeah. But Billy West, now it's a young fellow named Eric Bauza. Mm-hmm. And he and all of us, the glorious nature of this part of acting, or this type of acting, is that we are not at all limited by the way we look.
Yeah.
The gentleman who is now the voice of Bugs Bunny on all these really good, the most recent Looney Tunes that are, I believe, playing on Hulu right now, they're really excellent. Or no, it's HBO Max. That's what it is, HBO Max. Man, are they good. And our friend Eric Bauza is the new voice of Bugs Bunny and illustrates my point perfectly. Eric Bauza is a young Canadian man of Filipino extraction. Mm-hmm. And he's a young man who would be typed for not for bad reasons. This is Hollywood, man. If Eric were getting a phone call, it doesn't mean he couldn't be any character. But at the beginning of your career, like a lot of Asian folks, you're going to be hired to maybe be in Mulan or being in, a circumstance in which an Asian performer makes sense visually.
Yeah.
But man, when you hear him do Bugs, all you hear is Bugs.
Yep.
And I love that. I love that about this gig. Because, man, I'm just at 64 years old with my white hair, I'm not limited by that, just like I was at 23 years old with my dark brown hair. I was limited only by my creativity and the kindness of people to hire me.
Yeah.
And it turns out the same issues apply. And I'm way better at 64 than I was at 54 or 44. So I'm still getting the same deference that has nothing to do with my looks, but the people who hired me are getting a much better actor, because the folks who grew up listening to me are now in positions of power in Hollywood, and they're hiring a guy who can give them more than they heard when they heard me the first time.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. So cool. We had Jim Cummings on, 2 months ago on the show.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, Jim's a great guy. It was a really fun conversation.
Oh, God, yeah.
What amazes me, though, people go, I want to be an actor, or I want to be an actress. I want to be a director. I want to be a cinematographer. I want to be, whatever element of Hollywood that they want to be. And there's a lot of visual elements where the job is at the forefront. People know, see, understand it. At least for me, I didn't grow up going, who does the voice of that person? Or, it was only when I got into my 30s that I really started thinking through all the elements that created this. So how did you go, this is what I want to do?
Right. Well, firstly, let me address something you just said. What, again, and I hate to use that term magical but it works. Mm-hmm. What is so, I should say, maybe wonderful. What is so wonderful about what you said is that you didn't really pay much attention to was doing the voice because it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't. It really only matters, to my own ego. It's always nice that people take the time to say, wow, you've done this a lot and you're worth talking to. And I accept that.
Yeah.
I think I am worth talking to because I can give you real-time information and 35 years of doing it and talk to you about stuff I'm doing that you won't see for a year.
Yeah.
So I'm in a unique position as an actor in Hollywood, for being here for this long. But you bought Bugs. You bought The Simpsons. You bought Mickey or whatever you liked watching animation-wise.
Yeah.
You bought because the art form was being done at a high level. It was a seamless integration of script, animation, and acting, and sometimes music.
Yeah.
And it made your soul happy. It entertained you. The tune might have stuck in your head. It might have made you cry, made you laugh. And that's why it works. So I love when people know who I am. They find out who I am. And then like Jimmy, he's a perfect example. You've got Winnie the Pooh and the Tasmanian Devil coming out of the same guy's mouth.
Yeah.
And when it's coupled with the animation, it's just glorious.
It works.
But when you see people in real life go, oh my God, did you know that the same guy, and then you see Jimmy say, oh, Baba, and then blah, 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 and it just is mind blowing. And it does what to millions what you're doing right now. It just makes you go, holy shit, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And so anyway, now to the second part of your question, I was inspired by all sorts of performers when I was a kid. The Pythons, the Goons, the usual suspects on this side of the pond, Jonathan Winters, Carol Burnett, Red Skelton, Lucy, over and over and over again, Rodney Dangerfield, Foster Brooks, stand-ups, you name it. Wonderful actors, wonderful performers. And Mel Blanc, and June Foray, and Dawes Butler, and Paul Frees, and Edward Everett Horton, and, Jay Ward, Bill Scott, the Rocky and Bullwinkle folks, all the Hanna-Barbera, all of that inspired and informed me. But I moved to L.A. in 1978 primarily to do live action and music. I was a singer who became an actor. And while I had certainly derived immeasurable joy and do to this day creating my own stuff and ripping stuff off from other actors and incorporating it into my own characters, that was not the reason I came out here. When I got here, animation was still pretty much relegated to the 3 networks on Saturday morning.
Right.
And there were occasional shows that were syndicated, after school on your local KTLA or KTTV or wherever you grew up, syndicated stuff, but not even close to the product we have available to us now. So I was doing, starting in like 1979, I was doing the typical stuff. St. Elsewhere, Hill Street Blues,
MacGyver.
MacGyver, thank you. I love American Style, Amazing Stories. I don't even know, 30, 40 on-camera commercials, and a lot of music. But obviously, I was limited by being an average-looking white kid from Motown. And that's okay. It's the way it goes.
Yeah.
You walk into a room and you're auditioning for a Clorox commercial, and all the little girls in the room could be your girlfriend, and all the little boys in the room could be your brother or your cousin.
Yeah.
We're all pretty much cutting the same physical cloth. That's just how it works. But in about the mid-'80s, my agent said, "Hey, have you ever thought of doing animation?" I said, "Well, of course I've thought of doing it. The opportunity's not presented itself." And they said, "Well, here is one that's happening. There are 2 new shows from this company, Marvel, and they're going to be doing 2 new shows, one based on action figures. Girls called them dolls, but boys had to call them action figures because I had my own G.I. Joe action figure when I was a kid. So there was a new cartoon based on the old G.I. Joe cartoon, or rather action figures and stuff for dolls for boys, and another show called Transformers, which was going to launch a new set of action figures. They'd love to have you come read." Great. Well, I read, and the first thing I noticed, Michael, was exactly what we discussed, is that the people in the room were many of the actors I'd recognized growing up on episodic television.
Wow.
And they were playing characters that had nothing to do with the way they looked. Nothing. And I thought, oh my God, I know Bob Ridgely from seeing him on Petticoat Junction. I know Hamilton Camp from seeing him on the Bob Newhart show. I know, I'm in the room with these guys. And I thought, this is not only the coolest thing for me, but what I did was just observe that these folks were limited only by their creativity, and often it was pretty wacky. And man, as they say, the first one was free, and you know what I'm talking about. And after that, dude, I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I told my agent, if this stuff, please send me out for more of this. Well, I didn't stop working on camera, but I certainly had been bitten by the bug, and I just thought, if I can cultivate a career in this realm, who cares whether I'm famous, man? I get to work.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I am flattered and humbled that you take the time to do this, and it is because I, through these characters, am famous, and I love that. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But it's after 35 years of working in virtual anonymity. But thanks to folks like you and the nature of social media and conventions and all that stuff, I have to tell you that more and more people recognize me just sort of walking down the street. And when they do, Michael, it is never anything but a joyful experience. from both parties. I have people who will meet me who generally just smile when I say, Narv, or, hey, God, Michael, look, you're going to help us take over the world, or, hello, Michael. You know, people do that, and they often do it in this glorious chortle, like, oh, my God, hey, guess who this guy is? But then I'll meet people more often than you would think who laugh, then they become very solemn.
Wow.
And they start to tell me the stories about the deep ways in which Pinky, and we're just talking about me, Pinky, Yakko, Carl Wieser, Raphael, Donatello, Mighty Max, Arthur from the Tick, you name it. Things that I never in a million years would have known. They tell me how deeply these characters have affected them in profoundly positive ways from any number of experiences. Soldiers who tell me they did 2 or 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan and they had their Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs DVDs because that was the way they were able to decompress after being on patrol, in which their job was to kill people and not get killed themselves.
Yeah.
And then they would come back, have a couple of beers, smoke a cigarette, and watch Pinky and the Brain. Or people would say, Mr. Paulsen, I was in the foster home system in Chicago or in Atlanta or Tucson from the time I was 6 months old till I was old enough to be on my own. And I was in 6 different families, all of whom I'm so grateful to. But it was frightening beyond belief. But every time there was a television, and every time my new foster parents said, what do you like? And I would say Ninja Turtles, or I would say Jimmy Neutron. And they made sure that I got to watch it with my brothers and sisters and all of that. And now I'd like you to meet my own children and my own wife. Yeah. And we're wearing our Ninja Turtle shirts. And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm sitting here, man, they start to cry.
Wow.
And I cannot even begin to tell you what that means to me, because for me, it was a joyful, wonderful way to live my dream and earn a nice living doing what I would do for free with people I would choose to have at my home. My personal friends are the most gifted actors in the world, but thanks to people like you and opportunities I never would have known had it not been for conventions and all these things that have sprung up and the internet and social media, my work, quote unquote, has a far, far deeper meaning than a paycheck or an action figure. Look, I like having a lot of money. I'm not going to steer you wrong, but the money has never come as a result of wanting to be famous.
Yeah. It's
come from following something that is a Jones for me. And now the Jones takes on an entirely different meaning because it affects people where they live. And it turns out they look for stuff and look for a respite from the madness in whatever way they can. And often, thank God, they turn to something as seemingly silly as cartoons. And then I find out that they often turn to it, sometimes even when they're in rehab. And then they come out going, you know what, man? I'm going to have my cup of coffee and put on my nicotine patch and do my meditation. And I swear to God, I'm going to start watching Pinky and the Brain because that's what calms me down.
Yeah.
How on earth, Michael, how on earth can I even begin to comprehend that compliment?
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. Crazy.
It's completely crazy. And you've really been able to see, you have kind of like this time in the 80s where animation becomes so much bigger and it bursts things like The Simpsons in the 90s. And you have this evolution of animation and you're seeing a lot of live action things turned into cartoons, and you're seeing a lot of cartoons turned into live action. And so there's this integration of the medium. And you know what was a kid's thing in the 80s has now become so much more of, you know, a 40 or 50-year-old watching a cartoon and it being completely part of the DNA of quality content that can be consumed.
Right.
Did you ever see that coming? Did you ever see the evolution to say, oh, this is going to be more timeless than just a kid's show?
I did. And I'll tell you, and thank you, boy, your questions are spot on. No wonder your show is so successful. I I remember the first time I started getting any juice with respect to people wanting to chat with me was when Ninja Turtles became a really big deal.
Mm.
And we were there from a clean sheet of paper. The only people who'd done it with it longer were Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, who literally created the comic book. But the four of us, or half dozen of us or so, but the four guys who were the voices of the original Turtles, we all worked on a lot of other things, and we're working on other things concurrently. But when Turtles turned into what it is, and when it really popped in like 1991, 92, that's when we realized that we were part of something that was culturally significant, because we were starting to get interview requests from Sweden and South Africa and, Israel, and it was crazy. But if that show changed my career trajectory a bit, then Animaniacs is a show that changed my life. And I have to say that I was aware of exactly the context that you mentioned, it being timeless, because I had worked with the same group from Steven Spielberg to Tom Ruegger to Gene McCurdy on down on Tiny Toon Adventures.
Yeah.
A lot of music, classic characters.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool. But then when Animaniacs came along, it was essentially, I think that was a show on which we were going to be set loose after doing our homework on Tiny Toons. And I remember saying to my dear friend Tress MacNeille, whom you guys know as Dot Warner and Babs Bunny and God knows everything else. You look at her IMDb, it'll blow your mind, because she's done, 500 episodes of The Simpsons alone, in addition to pretty much every episode of Futurama. She is the most prolific voice actress in the history of Hollywood ever. End of story. But I remember, and I've known Tress since she was a cocktail waitress. So to see her career skyrocket, and she still does it at a high level. I remember when Animaniacs started to gain traction, and we had a room full of actors who were we were doing 2 episodes, and there was not enough room at the microphones for everybody, so we were all kind of playing musical chairs. And so in the room, not only were the main cast, that is Tress MacNeille, Jess Harnell, and Rob Paulsen, Dot, Wacko, and Yakko, respectively, and yours truly and Maurice LaMarche, Pinky and the Brain, respectively. We were all in the studio, but we also had actors Mark Hamill, Carrie Elwes, Jim Cummings. I think Tara Strong was in there, Frank Welker, all really heavy hitters. Billy West, I remember, was there, who were there to play different roles. And I remember looking at Tress and saying, Jesus Christ, honey, take a look at this, because unless you're on The Simpsons, and you are, and by the way, Nancy Cartwright was also on Animaniacs and plays the voice of Bart.
Right.
And she was at that set. And I said, this just doesn't get any better. This is really the stars aligning. I mean, we've got Steven, we've got Tom Ruegger, we've got a 40-piece orchestra. It just doesn't get any better. This is pretty special.
Truly
and
epic.
You know what? Yes, and I was right. And it wasn't a big deal that I was right. Helen Keller would have known this was a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you said something really profound, because, I'm gratefully 50% of the Ninja Turtles. I was Raphael in the original show and Donatello on a 2012 iteration of the show. So I know all about action figures, and I'm very proud of that. When you can create something that affects people to their soul and then pass the love of it on to their children and grandchildren, and you can create $6 billion worth of merchandising, which means a lot of people have been employed, and you're inspiring new young artists to come up with their own version of Ninja Turtles. You've created something that is utterly timeless and influential, and will be so long after the people who created it are dust.
Yeah.
But in the context, with respect to Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain, what is glorious about that is that we're seeing a renaissance and a reboot of those shows with Mr. Spielberg at the top again, 25 years later. And the sole reason, Michael, is because that it was art for the sake of the art. Yeah. The content of those shows had very little to do with selling merchandise. You're going to see T-shirts and socks and lunch boxes and all that stuff, but nothing compared to Transformers or My Little Pony or G.I. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Not even close. Or Ninja Turtles. So that is where we know we have something. Same with Rocky and Bullwinkle. Same with Bugs. Of course there are Bugs T-shirts, but if you want to compare the amount of money that Bugs Bunny has earned compared to Transformers and Ninja Turtles, I think it's kind of, it's kind of a lost cause. Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain specifically are being brought back because of the ingenuity and the intellect of Tom Ruegger and his crew, knowing all through the 90s that what they were creating was going to be utterly timeless.
Yeah.
And they were right.
Yeah.
You're a prime example of someone who would have maybe watched an episode years ago. Maybe you're a little bit old, I'm not sure, but you could have said, I totally see what these guys were talking about when they made this political reference or this historical reference and lampooned it.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I laughed about the joke and the anvil being dropped on the head, but now I get the political context that the joke was being made.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are experiencing now when they watch it on Hulu or on HBO Max.
Yeah.
And that's a really big deal because it is art for its own sake.
Yeah.
And it is a purely important American art form. Not that animation is peculiar to America. It certainly isn't. But those shows that become timeless around the world are often from the American ethos. Mm-hmm. And Animaniacs is one of them. And I'm really proud to be part of that. That's a big deal.
Well, we're going to take a break right here. And when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation we had with Rob Paulsen. Are you enjoying today's conversation with Rob Paulsen? Well, there's a lot more coming up in a few minutes, but I have some exciting news. There was a lot to this conversation, so much so that we're going to release a part 2 to this conversation later this week. We're going to actually get into the nitty-gritty of being creative, of being fearless when you create, and how you can find your own voice. Super fun to be able to continue the conversation with Rob later this week. Now let's jump back into the conversation we had with Rob Paulsen. For me, I look at some of the animation that's being created today, and there's a lot of vast range of demographics they're trying to reach, messages they're trying to share, what they're trying to communicate. What I love about some of these classic shows, and there are shows, cartoons, animation that's being done today that are going to be timeless, but it threads this needle between what's appropriate for kids, what's appropriate for adults. It threads the needle of obvious and obscure. It's not to the point or crude or over the top. It threads this unique needle of being able to be broad with, at the same time, feeling like it is universally pointed at me, which is a really unique thing because it's easy to create content that's hyper niche focused. It's another thing to create something that's universal but feels like it's just for me.
Boy, exactly. And that's not easy. Obviously, if it were, you and I would, it's not. I mean, I get a kick out of BoJack Horseman. It's a funny show. It's clever. I don't know that it enjoys the same kind of wide appeal as Ninja Turtles.
Right.
In any form. And I would submit that it probably, I could be wrong, it probably won't be something that is rebooted or revisited by generation after generation.
Right.
Just like Axe Cop or even Samurai Jack, something that was a really cool show, but it is more niche oriented. And I love that the niches are available.
Right.
And the nephews, sorry. But I love that people can make content like that that is very niche. Anime used to be very niche. Hayao Miyazaki was treated with reverency by Steven Spielberg and the usual gang of suspects, Marty Scorsese, and you talk to these guys about animation, and they immediately bring up Hayao Miyazaki and others, of course, Walt Disney. I got that, but now we have a circumstance, especially with places like Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, where creators can get to people with a ton of money, and they're not beholden to advertisers.
Right.
They're beholden to their creativity. Of course, there's money involved, and and shows that don't garner eyeballs will probably go away.
Yeah.
But the opportunity is there for them to do it. So that is to say, when you have something that, as you said, can walk that fine line between being kind of obscure and irreverent, but not obtuse,
right, and
get the attention of hundreds of millions of people, and make Mike Woodward go, oh my God, I totally get that. How did they know that joke? I totally understand what they're talking about. That is really unique.
Yeah.
And not worry about whether or not it sells 100 million action figures.
Yeah.
Because it's not about that.
Right.
It's unusual. And Looney Tunes is like that. The Simpsons certainly has gobs of merchandise, but only because it's become part of the culture. It's
That's right.
so
Yeah.
big and so unique. And the actors get paid a ton of money, and they should, because that show literally put Fox on the map.
Right.
And so that is its own animal, because it's the longest running scripted show in the history of television.
Right.
Thank you very much. So that's in a different class. But to be part of something that is script driven and politically and culturally driven, and it's not performed by any movie stars.
Yeah.
It's not celebrity driven. The Yakko's the celebrity. Rob's part of it. And at this moment, I'm a celebrity in this context because you're kind enough to want to talk to me. But Yakko is not voiced by Sean Penn.
Right.
And Dot is not voiced by Meryl Streep. It's not about that. It's about content and the creativity of the writers and the animators and, yes, thank you, the actors. But, it's not about whether or not you've got George Clooney being the talking chicken.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's not sour grapes. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a capitalist. I'm free. This is about free enterprise. If Mike Woodward has a show, has a talking chicken, and George Clooney says, I'll do it for $500,000, and you say, great, that's who I want. Good for you.
Yeah.
If you don't have a good script, you could have Jesus in the role.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I am so proud of being part of something that's become culturally significant for its own sake, not who's voicing it, not how many action figures it sold, because I've also had the great privilege of being part of something that is about that. Mm-hmm. And it's not all bad. Just because it makes a lot of money doesn't mean it's all bad either.
Yeah.
I'm in such a unique position, and I am grateful that you understand that, because I really can talk with a certain amount of authority about how this works. It's remarkable to be part of it. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think it was on NPR recently, I was hearing Terry Gilliam from Monty Python.
Monty Python. Oh,
yeah.
My goodness. What a great example. Yeah.
And he was talking about timeless writing, and specifically he was talking about comedy writing, but he was talking about how we've lost something in our ability to write things that are smart, witty, and funny at the same time. And I think animation's one of those places that there's still like an honor there. I mean, there are some specific shows that are very on the point. They're going to do the cheap jokes and stuff like that. But I feel like there's still a lot of space where they're doing smart writing in the creation of the content.
Absolutely. I think that you're 100% correct. And that is happening, one of which is a new show that I've been really fortunate to work on, is Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
And here's a great example. The first lines I had on Rick and Morty, I was playing this little dog, who was all bent out of shape, because he had been given the gift of voice. And what he was doing was speaking on behalf of dogs who were kind of like going, wait a minute, how come you guys treat us like indentured slaves?
Right.
Now, it was a metaphor. So before people going, oh, I love my dog. Well, you may not have seen the episode, and it may not be for you, but your point is well taken. The first lines I had as this testicleless fixed dog were to one of the female protagonists. I said, where are my testicles, Summer? And it was obviously tongue-in-cheek, but the point was, you did something to me that I never gave you my permission to do.
Right.
And then this wonderful actor comes in who plays Jerry. And, oh, God, I'll get his name. He was on Saturday Night Live. He's a terrific actor. But anyway, I'll remember. But he comes in and he sees that, Snuffles, the dog, is talking to his daughter, Summer. And he's like, whoa, oh, gosh, hi, wow, what's going on? And Snuffles says, oh, hi, Jerry. Come to rub my face in urine again. And what it was first funny because I looked at the creator, Justin Roiland, who, by the way, the reason I was hired was because he grew up watching Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. He's a smart kid.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to someday write that stuff. And when I do, I'm going to call Rob Paulsen, and I'm going to call Maurice LaMarche, and I'm going to call Tress MacNeille, and I'll be goddamned he did. But anyway, I looked at him, I said, man, this is incredible, because I'd already read the story. But ultimately what happens is that there's this sort of minor insurrection where the dogs get together and it's kind of pithy because there's a story. It's funny, and that's what gets your attention. But later on, some of the dogs start to really get out of line. They start to get a little frisky in the wrong way. They maybe start to talk about looting. They start to bust open windows. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And Snowball now turns around. He's changed his name to Snowball because Snuffles was his pet name.
Yeah.
So Snowball says, no, we are not them.
Yeah.
We are not going to behave in a human way. When we don't get what we want, we're not going to start breaking things. What an interesting metaphor for what we're experiencing right now. And I do not mean to demean what's happening. My point is, it's smart writing.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you talked about. And what do we have now? We have Rick and Morty is enormous because it understands, Rick and Morty understands, the show understands, Dan Hartman and Justin Roiland understand that to win, you don't condescend to the audience.
Yeah.
You don't assume that they don't get it.
Yeah.
And the reasons that they write the show the way they do, and it's not for everybody, it's definitely edgy, certainly more controversial and maybe even offensive than shows like Animaniacs or Pinky and the Brain, but it's also 25 years later.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that people don't have the right to say, oh, not for me. Click, fine. But the reason they get to write shows like that is that they were informed by shows like Animaniacs and The Simpsons and Family Guy. And those creators, Seth, Steven, even Steven, were influenced, Al Jean, Jim Brooks, all influenced by Rocky and Bullwinkle, by Looney Tunes. And they would all tell you that. If Maurice LaMarche and I walked into the writer's room at Saturday Night Live and they found out who we were, they would lose their minds. Not because we're celebrities, but because we're the voices of Pinky and the Brain.
Yeah.
And those kids in that room, and I can tell you that because Lorraine Newman is one of my best friends. And when she tells you who informed Al Franken and Tom Davis and Michael O'Donoghue, it is the Pythons. But it's not just the Pythons. It's the Pythons. It's Jonathan Winters. It's Mel Brooks. It's Mel Blanc. It's Looney Tunes. And so just because it's a cartoon doesn't mean that it can't be culturally significant.
Yeah.
And your point, vis-a-vis Terry's point, was exactly that. And so, I get that experience. We're now back in the studio doing Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain again. And you know what's so delightful is to see the faces of these young writers who, when they hear Yakko start, saying their lines, they often get tearful and they have to step out of the room and they go, wow, I got to tell you, this is freaky, man. This is blowing my mind in the coolest way. And I'm sure Mr. Gilliam sees it all the time.
Yeah.
He would if I met it.
Yeah.
He's not that much older than I, maybe 10 years. I don't know. But, oh my goodness, those guys are utterly responsible for me being the type of person I am. And I could say not responsible for my work, but they're definitely responsible for giving me the tools that has gotten me this work.
Yeah.
And that is categorical.
Wow.
And so we're seeing that the same thing with stuff like Rick and Morty. And right now there's some 12-year-old, some precocious 12-year-old who could be, as a result of all this technology, in India or in maybe even in Afghanistan or in a place, like Myanmar that has still been subjugated. Whatever might be able to watch this online, or even in China or a place that doesn't have access. I know I'm getting a little far afield, but you see my point.
Yeah.
That you're talking to somebody who has lived, even to this point, a life where this content is available on your cell phone, and you never know who is going to be inspired in a circumstance that would have never happened 30 years ago, let alone 60 years ago.
Yeah.
We can't put a value on how important that is.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a small little creator. I mean, our show reaches a couple 100,000 people a month through the different channels that we're out. And I'm not reaching the world with some of the kind of Hollywood power out there, but it's amazing to me. Even I think our show last month reached around 600,000 people, so over 500,000 people. And to me, what was amazing is that I shot an email to someone a couple months ago, not to be on the show, but just saying, hey, I'm coming into the city. I'd love to meet with you. And I was going up to New York, and they're like, oh, I know who you are. I listened to your show. And it just shocked me because I'm like,
boom.
How? Well, how did that happen?
Yep. Isn't that just the most wonderful thing?
Yeah.
For years, for the first 5-6 years, I was going to Comic-Cons.
Yep.
People would put my name on the webpage and say, hey, Rob Paulsen, voice of Yakko and the voice of your childhood, and huge praise, very nice, and I'll take it. But then I did a podcast, and I did it probably for the same reason that you and millions of others do, because I've been a guest on several, and I realized that, gosh, I am certainly not an MIT grad, but I don't think you have to be one to do a podcast. And I one day, because work was particularly slow, and necessity is definitely the mother of invention, also fear is a great motivator.
Yes.
I looked at my phone, and I said, Jesus Christ, everybody from whom a fan of cartoons, which is pretty much everybody with a pulse at some time in their lives. Yeah. All these people's numbers and contact info is on my little phone here. So I started calling people like, the usual suspects we talked about. And they said, sure, because I've known them for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Oh, yeah. Well, if I'm doing a podcast, I want to be on one with somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yep.
So I started my own podcast called Talkin' Tunes.
Yes.
And I did it literally by going to my friends' homes, Mark Hamill's house, Kevin Conroy's house. I got to stop dropping names. Bob De Niro told me that. But, I know these guys.
Yeah.
Because the people my son's age at 35, he's a Batman fan.
Yeah.
But to him, and he likes Star Wars, okay. But to him, Mark Hamill is the freaking Joker, baby. End of story. And Kevin is Batman.
Yep.
As much as my boy loves Chris Nolan and all that, if he had to choose on a desert island, it would be Kevin and Mark. Okay. So I started doing it. It becomes successful. Ultimately, 5 years later, I'm able to monetize it because Nerdist says, hey, why don't you come do this on camera?
Right.
And I did. So we did another 90 of them on camera. We're done with that now, and I'm working up for another platform. But here's what happened. Exactly what you're talking about. I started going to conventions after my show becomes, successful in that realm. And then I start showing up at these conventions, and I get to my table, and there's a big banner, like there is with everybody, with my face and all this stuff, and it says, Pinky, Yakko, Arthur from The Tick,
Yep.
host of the Talking Tunes podcast. And I thought, what are you oh yeah, are you kidding me? These people here, once we told them that you were the guy who's coming and you're the podcast guy, they wanted to meet you because all these people listen to your podcast. Well, I don't know about numbers. I don't know about metrics and all of that. But I knew people were watching because I kept doing them and Nerdist kept paying me.
Yeah.
But Nerdist doesn't release information about how those algorithms work, and I don't even know what that means. All I know is that people decided sometimes to drive 2 states away to come and meet me because of the podcast.
Yep.
They learned via the podcast who I was, not by watching the credits. They said, "Oh my God, I love your podcast." And then I just saw that you did one with Seth Green. I love Seth Green. Mm-hmm. But then I found out that you were a friend of Seth's because you were guys on Ninja Turtles, and Seth was freaking out because he was on your podcast because he grew up listening to you. And then I thought, well, who is this guy? Then I flipped out and said, oh my God, I've listened to you too, but I wouldn't have known it were it not for your podcast.
Yeah.
It's, I keep saying mind-blowing, but I don't even know any other way to describe it. It's exactly what you encountered.
Yeah.
And in my lifetime, and you and I are speaking as equals because we know about this technology, but in my lifetime, if when I was 35 or 40 even, somebody had said, hey man, 600,000 people responded to your tweet.
Yeah.
Or listened to your podcast, I would have said, what? 600,000 people? Now we know in our context that that's not that many relative to really popular podcasts.
Right.
But the frame of reference that I have literally enables me every day, Michael, to stop and kind of shake my head in disbelief and say, how did I get here?
Yeah.
As David Byrne says, well, how did I get here? It's beyond my comprehension.
Wow.
I'm a logical fellow and I can understand things, but I'm in the point now where I kind of go, oh, great. Looks to me like I'm almost at 80,000 Twitter followers. Oh, Rob, you really should be because look, so-and-so's got 14 million and you're better than him.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. You know what I mean? It's just so difficult to comprehend.
Yeah.
But were it not for it, in quotes, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. And how wonderful that we can.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just crazy how this world's changing so much.
Oh, my God.
And just how the conversations are changing. It's super cool.
Yeah.
We always finish the segment with a couple questions. I want to make sure we ask these questions here.
Okay.
The first one being, how do you find purpose in what you do?
Well, I find it as a result of the incredible kindness that is afforded me through these characters. We've already touched on it a bit by the way people get tearful often when they tell me their stories. One of the things that's happened more, and you saw it on my TED Talk, I gave this example that was quite stark, I think, of this young man who's autistic. And
Chad, right?
Yeah. Well, Chad was the young man who had muscular dystrophy.
Yeah. The one that came to the convention, the gentleman. Yes. Okay, with his sister.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a series, for those interested, I have a TEDx talk. You can just go online and say Rob Paulsen on YouTube, Rob Paulsen TEDx. That's SEN, Paulsen. But there's a lovely segment at the end, and Chad is yet another example of how I gained purpose years ago with this. But more recently, when autism became something that was understandable and quantifiable, I guess, or diagnosable. For your listeners, what happened is I was at a convention, I think in Pennsylvania. It was in Pennsylvania, as I recall. Philly, if I'm not mistaken. I've done a number of them, Harrisburg, all over the place. Anyway, this young man is on the spectrum, had difficulty with anxiety, social anxiety, which is not uncommon in that realm. And as you all know, when you go to convention, it's a big deal, especially in Philly. Lots of people, lots of really cool stuff, but it's very noisy. And it can be quite anxiety-inducing for anybody, let alone somebody who's predisposed to that problem.
Yeah.
But this young lady brought her brother, and they drove 3.5 hours because he wanted to meet Yakko. This young man just loves Animaniacs. And this young woman came up to me, sort of jumped in line and was very sweet, but she said, "I'm so sorry, I just need to," and I said, no, it's okay, what's up? Because I just love to talk to people. You don't need to buy anything. And I just loved it. Clearly, I was aptly cast because I haven't shut up for 45 minutes. But she said, "I just want you to know that my brother's here, and his appearance and his demeanor may be a bit off-putting. He's autistic." I said, "Say no more. My oldest nephew is autistic. I have had hundreds of encounters. I get it. Thank you very much. And we'll get through this together. No problem."
Yeah.
She said, "But he just lives for Yakko." Okay. So I could see him coming, 10 or 15 people down, and he was rocking back and forth. Bless his heart. His palms were sweaty. And I mean, it was hard to watch, the poor sweet kid, but his sister was there rubbing his back. He's probably 30. And it was beautiful to watch, as beautiful as difficult as it was to watch, how she was taking care of him. He finally made it up to me. She stepped back to take photos. So there's a series of 3 photos that I presented in my TED Talk.
Yeah.
The first one is he's coming up to me, and I've got my hands on his shoulders, and he is inconsolable. He's crying. I think he's got one of his hands up to his eyes. Mm-hmm. His sister is taking a picture over my shoulder. You can't see my face, and it doesn't really matter. Then about 5-10 seconds later, he's starting to get his stuff together. Mm-hmm. And then in the final photograph, and these photographs happened all about 20 seconds apart.
Yeah.
I'm like, "It's okay, buddy. It's all right. We're good." "Okay, I'm so sorry." No, it's okay. Then I said, "So I understand you want to talk to Yakko." And boom, he did exactly what you're doing now, Michael. His eyes lit up. He started to smile, and all that shit went away.
Yeah.
And so we started chatting with Yakko, and it was nothing short of fascinating in a purely anecdotal sense,
yep.
But it was miraculous in a soulful sense. Mm-hmm. And that was not the first time it had happened, but it was the first time I had it captured on film, and that it was so stark.
Wow.
Because Yakko comforted this young man. And again, it's not false modesty, folks. It wasn't me. I could have talked with him all day, but that wasn't going to get him out of his head.
Right.
It was Yakko.
Yeah.
And it could have been Bart. It could have been My Little Pony. It could have been Mickey. Who knows? It could have been Batman. It doesn't matter. It could have been Ryan Reynolds. It could have been a celebrity, just for their own sake. The point is, it really doesn't matter. In this instance, it was Yakko, and I could help. Mm-hmm. We could help. Mm-hmm. Naturally, his sister was in tears and thanked me profusely and all of that. But truly, it is I who am the thankful one, because she and her sweet brother gave us a perfect example of what your question was, which is purpose. Mm-hmm. That gives me purpose. The opportunity to meet people on the spectrum over and over again. Our little buddy Chad, whom we discussed in the TED Talk as well, and who's the metaphorical star of my book, Voice Lessons. Yeah. I had a bout with stage 3 throat cancer a few years ago. I'm fine. And yes, trust me, the ironic nature of getting throat cancer was not lost on me. The first thing I did was laugh and say, "Wow, and when we make plans, you really do laugh, right, God?"
Yeah.
Like, hey,
and even your Russian doctor made you laugh.
There you go. That's right. It was Dr. Skretchin. It was my Russian doctor. Oh, God, that's a great story. Thanks for bringing that up. My radiation oncologist, folks, the day that I got to meet my radiation guy who was going to zap me for the next 7 weeks, he had learned through my traditional oncologist of what I did, and that I had a good sense of humor, and that I was handling this okay. I didn't go, "Oh, my God." I just said, "Okay, well, I reckon we better get this done, hadn't we?"
Yeah.
So he comes into me the first day, and he says, "Mr. Paulsen," his name is Henry M. Polsky. "Mr. Paulsen, it's a pleasure to meet you. Let me tell you, I feel certain we can cure you. Unfortunately, before we do, we almost have to kill you." And I started laughing because I thought, oh my God, this guy really gets, as you said, this guy gets me.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I think really good healthcare professionals do. They do a little homework, and they don't try to make it cookie cutter. He tweaked his rap to fit me. Mm-hmm. How cool is that?
Yeah.
So he immediately won me over. He's not going to talk to a 37-year-old mother of two in the same way.
Right.
But he won me. He got me.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. I can now talk to people, whether it's a sweet little boy or girl, who want to talk to a particular character on the phone, and their parents say, just so you know, their chemo puts them in a position where they really like this when your character does that. Mm. I can do that.
Yeah.
And that is the purpose. And our little buddy Chad, who has since passed away, but during my treatment, I was, even if I had been told you better get your shit together because you're on your way out, I had nothing about which to be sad. Nothing.
Yeah.
But what I was told was that you're going to make it, but before you make it, we're going to have to kick the hell out of you. It's a pretty brutal treatment for obvious reasons. It's your mouth, your throat, your neck. It's hard. Okay, big deal. Right at this very moment. At this very moment, somebody's getting a phone call about their 6-year-old. Are you kidding me? So I had that context. But the reason I had that context was because I'd already had a glorious career in which Raphael, Yakko, Pinky, Carl Wieser, Donatello, even Snowball now are called upon to call kids of all ages in various and cameos, all that stuff. And I get to see firsthand how deeply these characters help people.
Yeah.
Turns out they help people even transition from this life to the next one.
Yeah.
Because when I was going through my own treatment, I had the parents of countless children, Michael, and it's not just me, we all get it, who somehow found a way to get a hold of me. I didn't put it on Facebook. I didn't put it on Twitter. I don't need sympathy. I am a lottery winner. Yeah. But sooner or later, people had to find out because I couldn't do my podcast. I had to fess up.
Right.
And the parents of these children, many of whom have been dead for years, got a hold of me and said, Rob, we just want you to know that we're thinking about you and you're fighting the good fight because you will never know what it meant to Chad, to Mandy, to Stephanie, to Michael, to Ash, to Robert, to Billy, to Johnny, to Tiffany. All of them are dead now. What it meant to them that one of your characters, and I put that in quotes, called them and talked to them on their level for as long as they wanted to talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was in person, sometimes it was on the phone, whatever. And again, you guys, it's not just me. But that is what taught me about the power of those characters. It turns out that joy and empathy and kindness, etc., courage, like love, come from the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful of the serendipitous nature of this work and how you never know when a properly placed nerve is going to make somebody go home and go, wow, did I need that? Did I need that? Yeah. And they do it to me. The numbers of people who meet me a year later or 2 years later, or you say, hey man, you made this message for me when I met you at Motor City Comic Con in 2007. And I never got to show you this, but here's my father about 6 weeks before he died. But you and Maurice LaMarche did a Pinky in the Brain video for him. Mm-hmm. And you need to see this because he's been gone now for 12 years, but I finally made my way back because now, we're meeting again. Yeah. So I'm going to stand in line for an hour, not to buy anything, just to show you this video of what you did for my dad. And I will never forget it. And we didn't do anything but do what we do naturally. Yeah. He asked. And that is what gives meaning to this work. Don't get me wrong, man. I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is way better.
Yeah.
I love having nice cars. I love having a great big. I want as much money as I can make. Yeah. But money to me comes from doing what is innate, and that is being joyful.
Yeah.
And even as much as I talk and as verbose as I am at a loss for words when it comes to being able to describe what that means to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And thereby go back to the people who don't get this opportunity that you've given me. Mm-hmm. I get to go back to the storyboard artists and the writers and the animators and tell them, you guys, you have got to see this video. So I'll let them all see, this is me talking to somebody and the character that we've all created. Look what we've done.
Yeah.
Look at that. This kid doesn't know from money. This young man will have trouble buying a Slurpee the rest of his life.
Yeah.
This young man will always need help. But when he talks to Yakko, he's benefiting from what we've all done, and it's not about money.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been so blessed to be in a position to share this information with the people who really do the work.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you, man. This gratitude you hear, folks, is not concocted. It's totally authentic. And again, you can talk to any of us who do this work, and they would all tell you the same thing. We get how lucky we are.
Yeah. So good. Well, that does it for part one of our two-part conversation with Rob Paulsen. Once again, we want to thank Rob for taking so much time out and chatting here at jumbleThink. His links are in the episode notes, not far to go, so check those out and connect with what he is doing. Again, later this week, we are releasing part two of this conversation. We're going to dive deep into the world of creativity, how you can find your own voice, what it takes to be fearless when you create, and much, much more. It's really powerful, especially if you have ideas and dreams. We get into the nitty-gritty of making those a reality. So don't miss the continuation of this conversation later this week. Now, you might be thinking, I want to continue listening, and how do I do that? What should I check out? If you're new to jumbleThink, here are 3 episodes I think you should check out if you're enjoying today's conversation. A couple weeks ago, we talked to Jim Cummings. He's the voice of Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, Tasmanian Devil, Pete from Mickey Mouse, Darkwing Duck, Roy from Princess and the Frog, and a bunch of other characters. Really fun conversation to hear his story, how he got into the world of voice acting, and much, much more. At the end of 2019, we were really fortunate to sit down with acting legend LeVar Burton to talk about race, religion, and the world of Hollywood. If you are looking for something that addresses the questions about race that we have, or going deeper into what life's really about, that is a really powerful episode. And of course, you're going to hear about working in Hollywood and creating as an actor, a director, and a writer. Super fun conversation. And finally, early on in the history of jumbleThink, we got to sit down with Bill Sheft. He wrote for David Letterman on his shows, and he's written some novels. He's written for Sports Illustrated and a bunch of sports magazines. Really cool conversation. A lot of really fun stories. That was early on in the history of jumbleThink, so go back and check out that early episode with Bill Sheft. Well, that does it for today's conversation with Rob Paulsen. Later this week is part 2 of this conversation. Super cool. Make sure to check that out. Thank you so much for tuning into jumbleThink. I hope today's episode has encouraged you on the journey of chasing big ideas and dreams. Now it's your turn to dream big and to change the world around you.
Ôtez tout ce qui peut vous gêner ou tirer votre attention. Cherchez la meilleure position. Les bras et les jambes légèrement espacés. Étirez-vous doucement, mais complètement. En avant, en arrière, sur les côtés. Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant. Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.